morning, everyone. Thank you for coming on this somewhat rainy day. It's a joy and an honor to have you grace our home. And there's such a wonderful variety of people. And that really, before we run for a little break, I'd like you all to introduce yourselves so we'll get to know everyone in this room. So I want to welcome in a special way our two presenters today. This is Brother Kevin Cawley, who's an Mennonite Christian brother. They even allow some of us hands in. And Kevin is the director of the Thomas Berry Forum, which was started and is still connected to Iona University in New Rochelle, New York. And Kevin is the brother's representative at the United Nations on this whole issue. And Kevin has a wonderful podcast called Carbon Rangers. Newsletter. Okay. Not a podcast. That comes through email. So if you want to get Kevin's terrific newsletter, Carbon Rangers, we'll put a sign out there. You can sign up for emails. Really terrific. And Kevin has been presenting on this topic now for several years, especially with Kathleen through the Institute of Kathleen's, the Degnan Institute for Earth and Spirit. And before that, we had Kathleen's Institute for Spirituality. Kevin was part of that. They've been joined at the hip for years. So we're thrilled to have Kevin with us. And this is my beloved sister, Kathleen Degnan. We became brother and sister early 90s. When we both were in the spirituality and spiritual direction program at Fordham. It was love at first sight. I don't know why, right? And Kathleen at the time was very engaged in the Thomas Merton Society, besides being full professor at Iona University. Iona College now is called Iona University, by the way. And we started giving programs together on Merton. Kathleen then became the president of the International Thomas Merton Society. Some of our Trinity folks are here. We came years ago, Kathleen and I gave a program in your gorgeous restored chapel on Thomas Merton. And then Kathleen kept boarding and teaching me the Genome Project and this thing and that thing. And before you know it, she became yeah, and it's national now. It's international. And then Kathleen started several institutes at the university, but her most famous now is the Degnan Institute for Earth and Spirit. And she also started the Thomas Berry Forum. Some of our folks here are from our Nova Intentional Community in Northern Virginia. And Kathleen with John Giuliani started the intentional community called The Grange in Connecticut, Ridgefield. So we're thrilled to have them both, and we welcome them.
Thank you all, and good morning. We don't have a microphone, and I'm not a redemptorist. and with a signing of ourselves in the familiarity, for those of us who are Catholic Christians, the sign of the cross, in the sign of that image of self-sacrificial transformation, in the sign of the directions of this glorious planet, in the sign of the depths within us and the expansiveness of us. So let us, in the name of the mystery and of its mothering creativity and of its encompassing mercy, we say amen.
Amen.
Listen, my soul, this is your task, to bless the earth and all her creatures, and come home again to dwell in.
Let us move into biocracy. Let us enter into participation with the large community.
Let us listen.
Each the time has come to lower our voices, to cease imposing our mechanistic patterns on the biological processes of the earth. To begin quite humbly, follow the guidance of the larger community, which all life depends.
As we enter into the dream of the earth, we are concerned with the earth not as an object of some human dream, but with the earth itself and its inherent powers in bringing forth this marvelous display of beauty in such unending profusion. A display so overwhelming to human consciousness that we may very well speak of it as being dreamed into existence. Our own dreams of a more viable mode of existence for ourselves and for the planet can only of this primordial source of the universe itself in all full extent in space and in the long sequence of its transformations in time. And let the community say amen.
Amen.
So, my friends, thank you. The work of this day is to explore the great work of our time and to be able to have a very compelling and real understanding of how existentially critical it is in this moment for us to own it and name it and know it as our own, to identify the particularity of the great work, however each of us is taking it up in whatever facet or feature of this living planet we may be assigned our task. Because it is an assignment coming to us quite really from this cosmos. Our work today is to awaken to this exceptional crisis and to know it in our entire sensorium, in our psyches, and to know of the possibility that is emerging alongside of this catastrophe that we are facing into, that confronts our whole entire human community and impacts it and impacts the entire community of living kind in this era of Anthropocene. If there are friends lingering at the door, come on in. I think there will be people better. So we begin today by getting a really comprehensive and almost granular sense of this crisis, this industrial crisis that we are experiencing, that is to say, the collapse of a petrochemical civilization that is unsustainable and that is, of course, bringing our whole entire planetary biome into threat. And what it means for us to live consciously, mindfully of that, day by day, moment by moment. I hope Father Thomas Berry will aid us in that. But it's Kevin who's going to give us a sense of state of the planet on this day. And we just have to take a moment, friends, to untoggle and retoggle. And I'm not sure exactly. Let's see. Sorry, let's do this. I'm gonna do this and hope it works.
Like silk off a spool. Good morning again. Thanks for being here, and thank you for listening to us. I think my companions remark earlier, we looked at the group and we saw their, as we say, the resumes, the door, I thought you might have a much better day if we just let you talk at the table. And we could sit here and sort of take notes, but we decided we better do this because we did promise Francis. To make a presentation.
Pope Francis.
So we're going with that. There'll be a break or two here in the process, because some of this is a bit much, and we delivered something similar on a number of occasions, and it's a little easier if it's punctuated by some. Take a breath. And I think for many of you, it's not gonna be news. Maybe good or not, we'll see. So it's reporting who we are again. And the theme that we carry around is this one, that's healing Earth. We talk about the predicament. That's really my job most of the time. I'm the predicament guy. A terrible attraction to catastrophe. It has driven me in this point to this kind of presentation. What is your challenge? It might be a moment. So it's human agency and global response. That's really where we're looking at. And we have a quote. The folks who did Latin, must be a few of you. It's Virgil writing to his enemy who had plagiarized his work. And he says, "Sic vos non vobis," for you, but not yours. We thought that's a good way to think about the planet. We start with the carbon story, 3 numbers. You've seen these, maybe you haven't seen them recently. The first number is the 2-degree Paris limit. So 2 was the number, but we know in Paris, as we say, the small island states, the developing nations, basically said, we're not signing that. That's a death warrant for us. And they basically walked out until the bigger boys came, said, no, come back. And he said, we'll make it 1.5 for the limit on warming.
What was Paris, brother?
Paris Agreement was from 2015. The Conference on Climate Change, COP, Conference of the Parties 21. So that's when all this began to take shape. We know that in Paris, a lot of that actual progress, if you can call it that, came from a lot of faith groups who went to Paris and were on the scene and working it. I know that, I'll tell a story later. How do I know that? The second number, 1,150 gigatons. That's basically the budget for the planet to keep us from raising the temperature above 1.5 C. So that's what we know. If we burn that much carbon, we'll push the temperature above 1.5. That's an important number. The problem number is the third number, and that is the known global reserve, 11,000 gigatons carbon, 11 times the budget. We know what we have. We found it, we got it, and for Exxon, we know we can take it out and burn it. That's got to stop. We can't do that if we're gonna keep the temperature. So that's our dilemma, if you can call it that, the carbon story. This is a chart that gives you a sense of when this began to happen in earnest, and it's temperature rise from 1880 to 2021 global. And you can see on the left-hand side, there's a tiny little 5C, 5.5 centigrade, and up top there is the 1 centigrade in the red, the upper left-hand corner. And you can see where we've gone. There are 2 markers there. One is the COP1, that's the Conference of the Parties on Climate. That was in the 90s. Then COP26 a few years ago in Glasgow. Despite the COPs and all the work, we're still in a bad place and getting worse. The first high red line there is around the time when Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher decided that we're going to drive the planet in that direction. They didn't say we're going to make it warmer. They just said we're going to do a lot more manufacturing and we're not going to worry about climate. The UN, this is the General Assembly room. You've seen it a lot of times on television. has taken what steps they could, because it's a voluntary organization, doesn't have a lot of policing power or judicial power, but it does have moral authority. This is where we get our starting point for this conversation. This is the landmark climate accord in Paris 2015. You can see at the time, Ban Ki-moon was the Secretary General. To his right, in the checkered top, is Christiana Figueres, who was actually running things and still doing a lot of wonderful things. She's a Costa Rican diplomat, terrific person. So in that picture, she's the only one who's still active in this work, as far as we can tell. That was the same year that we had Pope Francis come to the United Nations in New York in September. So September he was in New York. December was the Paris Agreement. The Holy See has been linked to the UN in many ways, and particularly lately. This is back in July of last summer. They made themselves a formal party to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And we were, at that time, the Holy See had not signed the Paris Agreement yet, but they have done so since then. In the 2022 Season of Creation message, Francis endorsed both the COP27, which was the coming up at that time in Egypt, and the UN COP15 conference on biodiversity. That's kind of an obscure conference that didn't get a lot of headlines, but it was in Montreal around the same time last year. And Conference of the Parties is the chance for all the nations who were signatories to those agreements to reconvene and reassess. Where are we? What's happening? And they're important because they have to happen, but they're not important in the sense they don't make anybody's television light up. That's the way it is. The COP27 conference, we're going to say a few words about that later. Then in July of 2022, a very important moment, Holy See was in favor of this, they voted yes. The General Assembly adopted a historic resolution declaring access to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment a universal human right. Now, the shock of that is, it took us until 2022. Really? It gives you some idea of the problems that the UN faces. They've been around almost 75 years, and they just got to the point to say sustainable environment is a human right. That was more disturbing than reassuring, but it's there, it's in place. It does give you language. Often enough, as you know, especially here in Washington, language in documents is really crucial. And you have a piece of legislation with the wrong language, you have a lot of problems. If you get the right language, it's a place to work from. This was another challenge. IPCC, those not familiar, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. They've been running these for many, many years. It's science. Collect the science, collect the science, collect the science. Give us a sense of what's happening. Tell us direction. So they always write these reports. This is from 2016 to member states, heads of government. The science people say, look, you're running your country or your state or wherever you are. Here's what you need to know. They send these out. Now, in this case, we just took a little slice of the data because we need to make a point. This was the 3 places that we think we can talk about in terms of the global temperature rise. The yellow line is business as usual. If all the nations said, well, that's terrible, we think it's an awful thing, but we have things to take care of ourselves, we're going to just continue on business as usual. If everybody took that position, science people, IPCC said that you will then end up with a temperature increase of 4.2 degrees Celsius. Catastrophe. Complete catastrophe. However, because they've had these meetings and they've asked the people, the countries to say, what will you do about this? And every country was given homework. Go home, write your national proposal. They call them NDCs, nationally determined contributions. Again, the UN can't impose things, it can suggest, encourage, support, foster, but it has to wait till the countries come back and say, here's what we promised to do. So they came back, and then the UN checked the homework, said, okay, if everybody does what they promise, the blue line is what happened. Still number, 3.3 degrees increase in the global average temperature would be another catastrophic moment. So, IPCC said, here's what you need to do. You got to set the goals down here in the green line. If you do that, we can maybe get there. So the enormous discrepancy was pointed out 7 years ago. 7 years ago, we knew this problem. The chant has become keep 1.5 alive. That's the 1.5 degrees centigrade. And that's the real goal. And if you're in any of these marches or demonstrations, or you're at any meetings, 1.5 is the marker that most of the 4 countries on the planet are saying, please, we're not going to make it. We can go past the 1.5 degrees. Now, right now, we're fiddling with it. So, we have to also say it's not just Exxon and Chevron. 3/5 of the world's oil and half of its natural gas is pumped by national oil companies. Again, an acronym, sorry, NOC. Aramco in Saudi Arabia, Gazprom in Russia, CNPC in China. National fossil fuel company, not just the bad boys that we know. This is a graph from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and it's a way to talk about this planetary boundaries. It's not just the carbon. They opened the lens a bit, and they looked at this, and they looked at the small green circle is we call the safe operating space for humanity. And then they split up in different sections. And we go at the top, and you look at climate change. It's up there at the top, and it has radiative forcing, CO2 concentration. You slip left a little bit, you're coming around the clock going backwards, so now we're back at 10 o'clock. Biosphere integrity, then we go back to the Montreal Protocol. Genetic issues, functional issues, then we have land system changes, we have fresh water, biogeochemical at the bottom, ocean acidification, atmospheric aerosol loading, stratospheric ozone depletion, and of course they always leave room, stuff we don't know about, novel entities. So we're concerned because right now, 6 of these 9 planetary boundaries have been exceeded, and a number of them are already being pushed out in the red. Right now, we think ocean acidification is still controllable, not as horrible as it could be, but we notice also that a lot of these other ones are past their moment. This, by the way, just it goes back. They went back to 2009. So in the last 14 years, only 3 boundaries were crossed in 2009, but by the time we got this year, we crossed 6 of those boundaries. Another disturbing place. We know about waste, we talk about it, and though we could do a whole day on that, but we don't need that. We have muffins and coffee. But just to remark on it, yes, it's a problem. This is a slide about plastic. Not a mistake. Mount Fuji, just about 3 weeks ago, Japanese scientists sampling the clouds over Mount Fuji found plastic. So it's everywhere. We know about Shark Week. If you watch TV, August, it's all that's on. And okay, it's exciting. However, mosquitoes, the disease they carry, kill more people in one day. Sharks kill in 100 years. Now, if you're watching television on Shark Week, you don't know that. You're not paying attention. But if you're watching what everybody else is watching, especially at the UN, you're watching the World Health Organization's concerns, that is going to be a massive problem. And I think New York Times a couple of weeks ago had a series on this. And they're talking about manufacturing mosquitoes that can pass on the malaria parasite, maybe even dengue fever. But that's the issue. Kill more people in a day The sharks kill in 100 years. That's our big challenge. We have a water story because we need it. 70% of the planet is underwater. Many times people say they shouldn't have called Earth. Water. Look at the picture. 0.03% is accessible and drinkable. All the water right. That's what we get. Takes 3 million gallons of this water to grow one beef steer. Takes about 4,000 gallons to make a Big Mac. Takes about 3,000 gallons to get cotton for a pair of blue jeans. We're using it up in ways that we need to think about. That's what's going on. We have another water story there. And by 2030, about half the globe could be facing water scarcity. From recent papers, you know that's already happening. Huge fights now about the Colorado River. There are going to be fights in Egypt about the dams that are being built upstream from Egypt. I always get confused. Look at Egypt, the Nile. They're at the top of the Nile. They're all set. No, the Nile's flowing south to north. So it's the 10 countries below Egypt that are blocking. It'll be an issue for them. And globally, the Pacific Institute lists about 500 water conflicts since 1900. About half of that is since 2010. So it's going to become an issue. It's already become an issue in many places. You get a lot of it in Africa with the pastoralists and the farmers, the herders trying to find water, bring their goats, cows, everything, wandering around. And the farmers are there saying, you can't do that. We need water for our crops. And often enough, it's become the religious struggle. A lot of the herders are Muslim, a lot of the farmers are Christian. You add that to the mix. Not a good thing. Now we have, of course, our own country. The fracking industry loves to get the water. Right now, to frack a well with oil or gas, they use about 40 million gallons of water. And dragging it out of the aquifer takes thousands and thousands of years to supply the aquifer from rain. That's a bad moment, bad combination. About 60% of the 100,000 wells in the last 2011 and 2016 were in places that don't have a lot of water. You can see the names. Texas, Colorado, Oklahoma, California. That's not a place to be sucking up the aquifer to frack, but that's what's happening. And, you know, basically like Texas, if you own surface, you own everything down to the center of the earth. That's the law. The companies are pulling the water out. Once they take it out, they always talk about, well, we're going to restore it. Well, you can't put back that polluted water. It's dangerous. So they have to get rid of it somehow. They tend to lay it out where it percolates back in, but it's already been compromised. And it messes up that natural cycle. We have an ocean heat problem. This is a graph that pulls out the average sea surface temperature across the planet. This is in Fahrenheit. And it's just from the last year. This is probably 2023 is the white line at the top. But you can see the average is the dark blue line in the middle. That's pretty much what it's been from 1991 to 2020. That's been the average, right in the middle. Suddenly, this year, it's completely, as we say, off the graph. Sea surface temperature, global, daily. So we know that that's happening. Is what's really compelling to me too is that Francis puts it in Laudate Deum. He talks about the ocean warming. That he knows it takes longer to warm the ocean. So massive, but it's already happened. We're down to 100 meters, 200 meters. That's news, everybody. But also the sea surface temperature. That's hard to reverse. Another one of our problems. We have the warming ocean takes up more space. Where the molecules work, warm water. The molecules are farther apart, they spread out. Water warm water, it takes up more space. So right now they're telling us that the global average sea level has risen about 102 millimeters, 4 inches, since 1993. And of course, especially when I do this for young people, 4 inches. Really? Would that be a slide? 4 inches? That's an unprecedented rate for the last 2,500 years. See? And if we put the 4 inches in one place, it would cover the US in 16 feet of water. That sometimes helps, especially young people. Oh, that's a lot of water. Now, luckily, USA is only 6% of the land mass of the planet, so you're really putting a lot in one place. But does help. We know that all of this impacts poor first. We're very fortunate. Most of us in this room don't have these issues in front of us. Climate change is going to do that. Sea level rise, severe weather, severe drought, desertification, deforestation. You can see all of these things impact poor places first and worse. Privatization of water, another issue. That's a whole separate slideshow. Food insecurity, we know some of you already work on food issues. Land grabbing and toxic dumping, that's happening in a lot of parts of the world. I hear about from my work at the UN, mostly from religious women who are working in those places and describing what's happening. Particularly if you're in Brazil, and at least up until the end of Bolsonaro, land grabbing was a regular occurrence. People who wanted the logs didn't necessarily want the log, but they cut the trees so they could plant alfalfa and grow cattle, and then send the cattle back to China as Big Macs. A terrible cycle. All those extractive industries usually impact poor people first. A couple years ago, Peru, you saw that story, perhaps of the woman, the little tiny Acuna lady, growing her potatoes, and then the army shows up in her front yard. The army. All these guys in these black vests and black shields told her her land was now part of it. The government's taking it. And it was a deal, it was a contract signed by a corrupt government with a corrupt mining company. Mining companies always need water. They have to do thousands and thousands of gallons of water a day just to get out what they need to get out. So they always want places with water and few people. That tends to end up being indigenous people in poor places.
And tell us about it.
Oh, she said, no, I'm staying. She's about 5 people. And the army said, you can't stay. And then basically they beat her up. But her sister, her daughter had a cell phone. Got some video. And went to work, and they found out that, yes, she owned the land, she had the property, she had the paper, probably the only piece of paper she had in her whole life. And she had it. She went to a local magistrate, and they said, yeah, she probably has a right to that. We got attention from Goldman Environmental Prize. Have you heard of that? Goldman Prize? Wonderful. It's like the Nobel Prize for taking care of the earth. And the Goldman Insurance Company, way out in California, every year gives out about 10 of these. No, 6. She won the prize for Latin America that year. That got the attention of some really good lawyers. This country, they went to bat. She went, had to be like up the chain. So she eventually won her suit, but it also got a lot of publicity, a lot of bad publicity from the world. This little tiny thing showed up at all her hearings with her little hat, with the serape, and she could sing. So we put the ocean in play here, and we talked about sea level rise, and we have an example of what that might mean. This is from projections, UN business again. Vietnam, maybe that's the border with Cambodia. That's Ho Chi Minh City, South China Sea. So we're at the very pointed end of Vietnam, at the bottom of Vietnam. Projections from satellite imagery. This was the first projection they did. Once a year by 2050, you'll have high tides. becoming over half. Then they redid the look, and they went back and got better satellite images and said, well, time out, but we have a better projection and we'll help you out. So now we think by 2050, once a year, Vietnam will get high tides into Cambodia. So if you're in public office in Vietnam, you get this kind of projection. Yeah, you better have a meeting.
Yeah.
Let's talk. But I don't know what they're doing. I know there's right now there's 99 million people. They don't have a lot of places to go. But this is an example. This isn't necessarily going to happen tomorrow morning, but between now and 2050, they say at least once a year you're going to have some serious issues, and you get generally migration because your countries from the ocean to the border with Cambodia. What will happen? That's the bottom of Vietnam. If you go farther up, in more mountainous areas, it's not as bad, but that's still horrendous. And that's an example of it. Sea level comes up, deserts are growing, with more drought, frequency and intensity of natural disasters, pushing people around. We know that, we've seen that. Another part of the story, Tuvalu. Anybody ever been to Tuvalu? In the Pacific? It's, you know, it's, what is it? 300 feet wide? It's nothing. It's an island nation. They're at the end. And they are crying out, saying, if we don't do something about sea level rise, we won't exist. You see in that picture, where do you go? The highest point in your country is 6 feet. You know, the bulletin, take the high ground. It's small, 12,000 people, but they are at UN. There's also a place called Vanuatu, Kiribati, Seychelles. All of those tiny dots in the Pacific are all in existential peril. We have a lot of people displaced already, 21.5 million. This is the IOM, International Organization for Migration, forcibly displaced. We're going to have that. Again, weather issues, climate issues. The droughts are not, maybe they're below the radar, but they're out there all the time. We don't see the daily stuff on the ground. That's an issue. We were talking about the water struggle, and Africa is a problem for Africa because 90% of its economy depends on basically the rain. 80% of their food comes from small holders, basically the women growing the vegetables. You're dependent on the rain, your agriculture, 90% of it, and you're getting more and more drought problems. We know the fires, we had a lot of that in California not too long ago. And it's not just people careless with their campfires, it's lightning too. These stories coming out about 10,000 plus trees in the national forest. Killed. That's a coil. You're not supposed to burn. Part of their appeal. They can't burn, they don't have bug problems, so now they do. And this, like a little triptych of what we're looking at here in the USA, this is just last year. Lake Mead is disappearing, Mexico is burning up. See that road, the right-hand corner, Yellowstone, floods. Pretty ferocious weather in the wrong places. You know? Nothing is working right. This is Pakistan, just a couple of months ago, maybe a year ago. So we talk about the drought and then we talk about the monsoon. Nothing's even anymore. So about a third of Pakistan at the time was underwater. A third of the country was underwater. One of the poorest countries on the planet. They had 33 million people with no place to go. And that's a photograph of Sindh province. And the third last year. And of course, they lost their agriculture. You can't grow anything. Those are, I think it's about 8 kids, a little, not a raft, it's a satellite TV dish. It's their lifeboat. Now, I'll take a breath. I always hope I didn't ruin anybody's day, but most of it I think you know, but to have it all at once. So Kathleen and I were trying to decide when to do break. We'll have a response at this section on what do we do about this? You know, we can keep right on going. We want to just take a break and have a cup of coffee. You want to talk to each other? What do you want to do? You want to keep going? You can do that. I need to stretch.
Great.
Take a break, a little stretch. 3 minutes. Like, by the way, the item is telling us that this is what we know with science guy, gals. Also, just information, IPCC is all volunteer.
Scientists.
They don't get paid for their science work. Sometimes that became an issue. Amy Westervelt is a name I recommend to you if you haven't read Amy. A thing called Drill. Very, no, doesn't pull her punches, but she's telling us, even there, that it's clear the technologies and the policies to address this exist. The obstacles are politics, and fossil fuel industry. We know how to do the right thing. This was the quick look at the COP last year, the parties last year, Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt. That's November. The next one is happening in almost a month's time. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. The first COP one took place in Berlin in 1995. Many of us, we were in grammar school, right? Last year it took place in Sharm el Sheikh. This year coming up in a couple of weeks, going to be in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. A lot of complications there. We won't talk about it right now. I want to give a shout out to the COP on diversity. Notice it's COP 15. They haven't had as many of these, but they're still becoming more significant for us. It's a treaty, the Convention on Biodiversity, was signed by 150 leaders in '92 in Rio. So when we talk about the Conference of the Parties, people who signed that treaty, the Conference of the Parties, and they keep meeting. This is their kind of mantra that diversity is more than the plants, the animals, and the organisms. It's about the people and our needs for food security, medicines, fresh air, water, all that. So it's connecting everything by a diversity question. My friend Mia Motley from Barbados was at the COP in Egypt. She called for reform of multilateral development banks. She's an economist. She became Prime Minister of Barbados just recently. They just became independent. They just left the Commonwealth, but they're still connected to Great Britain. And she's been a very powerful speaker on this question. And she calls out the petrostates. Basically, $4 trillion is the windfall. $4 trillion. Most of it came because, sadly, the Ukraine thing pushed everybody into panic. It's bigger sum than the entire UK economy, about 20 times all the international aid budgets of the world. And it's 40 times the 100 billion a year target for the global south that was pledged in 2009, 2020, but never reached. The argument here is the money is there. We know who's got the money. Don't tell us there's not enough money to save our planet. The windfall is given energy exporters, including the Gulf states and Norway, nearly $1 trillion earnings from their foreign sales alone. We mind our own stuff. And basically, the failure to recycle a fraction of this is a great scandal. Certainly, I can say that I have no money, but there are people with the money. And I think the Norwegian prime minister was interviewed during Climate Week in New York. And they're still going for oil in the North Sea. They have the largest sovereign wealth fund on the planet. They don't need the money, but they're being careful, as I said. The Bridgetown Initiative is the Barbados argument that the proposal would be to establish a trust, climate mitigation trust, that will prompt the release of $650 billion from the International Monetary Fund through a mechanism called special drawing rights. This gets a little wonky here, which allows members to borrow from each other's reserves at very low interest rates. They're just trying to reset the rules. The money's there. Reset the rules, and we can help these poor countries. My poster boy for that is, I think it's Ghana. It's independence in '84. They've gone bankrupt. The country's gone bankrupt 17 times.
Mhm.
And every time they have to go back to the IMF, the World Bank, and they have to reset. And the interest rates are lower. So that there's just a horrendous cycle. They're not getting out. Anyway, she called out a lot of leaders and made several proposals, which were, of course, up to now ignored. We'll see. Now, we've heard about Greta. We love Greta. Fabulous. But there are other folks in this circle. Martini Prakash, one of the founders of the Sunrise Movement. Wawa Gatarufi, the Kenyan American. In the left-hand corner, Ayesha Sadiq, Pakistani. Vanessa Nakata, Kenya. Shia Bastida in the right-hand corner, Mexican American. Kathleen and I know Shia Bastida. And then Radhima Pandi. Anybody recognize Radhima? Anybody saw the letter? That's her, the little Indian girl from the letter. How many have seen the letter? Please, please, you do nothing else. It's on YouTube, the letter. It's about Laudato, but it's wonderful. Radhima was 9 when she first sued her government. And now she's 15 or something. She's still in action.
Mhm.
Obviously, there's something about these pictures. Where are the guys? Women of color. That cheers me up.
Mhm.
They're not afraid and speaking up, and they're leading. So thank you, Greta, who kickstarted it. At the beginning of the General Assembly in the fall, September, the Secretary General Guterres spoke to everybody and he told them the things about what he saw happening. And he had a climate ambition summit, special summit. Now he couldn't exclude people from the General Assembly, but he had his own climate ambition summit, and he had a guest list. Oh. He said, "You guys can't come. USA, India, China, Russia, because we weren't doing enough about this." And now I see Francis calling out, particularly USA, that you people, pointing the finger at you people. Well, the Secretary General called out a number of those countries, and they were not invited to speak at the Mission Summit. They were obviously at the UN. And as he began the conversation, he praised 5 groups, talked about some businesses, some governments, etc. The first group he mentioned was activists who refused to stay silent. It's acknowledging like the 6 young women we just looked at, and then the rest of us who were sometimes doing our marching. Iona University, the Climate March, Dagon Institute for the Spirit, and we even got mentioned in the National Catholic Report.
Mhm.
So that was our group. The guy with the beard right in the middle is James Robinson, who's part of the Dagon Institute.
No.
Well, there's 2 guys with beards, all right? The guy with the glasses and the beard behind Cornell West is our guy. In front of you. That's what beers. Now, at the summit, we have what they call a global stock take. First one, we did, the Sustainable Development Goals for 2015. Everybody's psyched about that. We bored in and said, let's do it. Way too many SDGs. I think we ended up with 17 goals for the whole planet. We gave ourselves 15 years to get it done. And at some point, they said, we got to check the homework. So they did that in 2023, this year. There was a nice report, but as is pointed out here by my friend Amy Westerveld, the UN, like Prose, glosses over what is truly a damning report card. Global climate effort. This is Ani Dasgupta, World Resource. Carbon emissions, still climbing. Rich countries' finance commitments, delinquent. Adaptation support lagging woefully behind. In every measure, the stock taking came up, we're not getting it done. It's important to know that this is the countries themselves looking at it. It's not the science people, it's not the IPCC. This is the country saying, look what we did. There are a lot of reports, lack of progress, but what's different about this one is it isn't a group of scientists or a UN agency. This is something that all the countries have to say. So the countries are calling themselves out, saying we didn't do a good job. And then, what do we say? Well, they said, we're pretty much saying that universal set of actions right now by setting goals, sending signals, et cetera, urgency, but much more is needed. And then specifically, the last line here, the world must reduce carbon emissions by 43% by 2030. We still want to meet the 1.5 degrees warming target set in Paris. Go back to the third slide, the carbon story. We're still burning too much carbon. What else we do, that's still a major issue. And they're talking about reducing it by 43% within 7 years. Now, the next COP, November 30th, is in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. The president is a man named Sultan Al Jaber, president of the COP, because the host country gets to name the president. He's also the president or the CEO of the National Oil Company of United Arab. Anybody see a problem? So we have this issue. And of course, he's been saying all the right things. We're going to do this. Better an oil person knows how to deal with this stuff, et cetera, et cetera. But Al Gore is having none of it. He's quoted here. He said that's just like taking the disguise off. They've captured control of the political and policy-making process in too many countries and too many regional governments. They've reached out to try to capture the UN process. Now, Greta said this 2 COPs ago. She was in Glasgow. They counted people in the room. They kept track. All the NGOs are good at this. Who's here? And they found oil companies in every room. And just about every conversation. Shaping conversation, shaping the honor. And even we got Bernard Looney, God bless him, an Irish person, head of BP, went in with the delegation from Mozambique. What? So it's not just that they're there, but they're hiding out when they're there. Imagine the head of BP pretending he's with Mozambique. It's so crazy that, yeah. But that's what's happened. And you got 300, 400, 500 fossil fuel types there. You get a lot of it. It's like a trade fair. Instead of a conversation about what we do. We'll see. At least now the IEA, the International Energy Agency, head of that is a guy named Fatih Birol. This group is actually getting true, but they were sort of founded many, many years ago as an antidote to OPEC. because OPEC had all the countries, this was another group that said, let's see if we can talk about energy. Now, right now, they're telling us if fossil fuel demand falls 25% by 2030, if methane emissions drop by 3/4, if renewable energy capacity triples, investment rises to 1.8 trillion from 1.845, etc., then we can probably get to net zero. But look at all the ifs. So it's not like it's impossible. They're saying it's possible if these things happen. That's a very reliable crowd. They know what they're talking about. I have to talk about us, USA. A lot of inequality, we know that. We were always against loss and damage. That's the term for rich countries doing something about poor countries that have suffered routinely. US is 4% of the population of the planet, but we send out 21.5% of the carbon. Again, interesting, Laudate, Francis is saying this, pointing, you people. He sounds, what's he say, exasperated. Not that it's an exasperation, triumph. And basically wealthier. 90% of all the emissions out there, wealthy countries. So Pakistan had contributed 0.04% carbon, but a third of the country's underwater from floods and climate. Yeah, they're 0.4% of all carbon. Touch. And then in COP, John Kerry, you know John Kerry, is our climate envoy, climate person, and he's the point guy, and all this. And he said there was no time to discuss loss and damage. That's in last conference of Sharm el Sheikh. So he's still pushing back. I'm trying to track what he might have said recently, but I haven't lost the trail. Maybe somebody in the room knows it. Where is Kerry on that? Basically, where is Biden? And Biden is in a terrible bind now because he's approved the Willow project, which is going to make a mess of the carbon, but he's on the back foot with the Alaska delegation because he needs their votes. The same thing has just happened on the border wall question. He's on the back foot every time on that. Except the jobs report yesterday morning was impressive. So the economy seems to be holding, but the other stuff is a challenge. We do a lot of subsidizing. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, was pretty good. Put 46 billion out there for clean energy. The U.S. direct subsidies to the fossil fuel industry is still at 20 billion. We don't make them pay for from the wellhead to the finance investment. All those incidental, so to speak, costs are out there in the public domain. Externalities, social and ecological breakdowns, include the actual cost is 600 billion. They actually got charged for the damage they're doing. You have to pay that much. It's obviously not working for us. The banks are investing still. 60 biggest banks put 700 billion for fossil fuel finance. So that every dollar they spend on clean energy, 65 goes to fossil fuels. It's schizophrenic existence if you're a bank. And of course, you've seen the ads, doing everything we can. Read all the ads, what the greatest bank in the world. But they're not. And the other crowd that's often, including the insurance industry, they don't get the headlines. They're out there all innocent, aggressive with infinite flow on TV every second. Liberty, liberty, liberty. Oh, money goes out the back door. Because you can't have an oil field without insurance. You know, you get the bank loan, you still have to get the insurance cover. The insurance guys have been escaping, but they're still part of the problem. That was in case we needed a break. Now here's the part 3. This is Francis. and help us out. What's our time?
It is 11 a.m.
Okay, so we have lots of time, we can have a lot of conversation.
Actually, we don't. Because I have to get up there at some point and undermine everything we've done.
You see how well rehearsed this is. So, Laudato was in 2015. And assuming everybody's read Laudato, we have a lot of time. And he's talking about it as part of the church's social teaching. I put that slide in deliberately because, as we know, pardon me my hurt feelings, but the American Catholic hierarchy has been a disaster, generally, on this question. Creighton's university study a few years ago tracked everything ever mentioned in a church publication for like 4 years after Laudato. And how many times was Laudato mentioned in official diocesan documents? It came out to something like 0.08%. So that's why you never heard it in a homily. At least I know. New York. But the argument is that for whatever reason, the Catholic hierarchy in this country it escaped their notice. And they didn't attend to it. Now, part of it was they were generally in a defensive crouch, a lot of other issues. And so it's hard for them, I suppose, to step up, but there were some exceptions, we know. Let's not go there. Now, he understands the global moment. In May of 2015, Francis issued Laudato Si. September 2015, the Sustainable Development Goals of the UN were launched. Now, Francis obviously had the calendar. Okay? So May was, what was it? Pentecost launches this thing. But we were still in conversation in the UN. We had 3 years of meeting on Sustainable Development Goals. We started off with about 60 countries saying, well, we'll take part in this. And then more and more interest developed. And I was in a room one day, we were watching, they were almost fighting over getting a seat at the table. There were only 60 seats or something. That was the arrangement in the structure. And different countries always wanted to say, I want to be in, So they ended up saying, well, we'll figure it out. And they divided it up. They still have 60 seats. But they share the seat. You got 3 countries sharing a chair. Obviously, it didn't do it physically, but that's how they arranged, because it suddenly became an issue that everybody wanted in on this conversation. Sustainable development. And it cheered everybody up, because okay, looks good, but actually it's everybody fighting for their own interests. That's what it is. Nobody in the room saying, I'm helping the world. I'm in the room helping them. I'm in the room helping you. I'm in the room helping. But anyway, we got it done. At that point in May, coming to the SDGs, and they had a schedule that was, we're going to finish in July, then in the General Assembly in September, we'll ratify. That's the calendar. And somewhere in June, we were sort of the end, and the chair of the group, Ambassador Kenya, Charia Kamau, came to the room, he gavelled the room and said, I have something to say. He held up the document. So I want people to know about this document. And there are 2 things in the UN you never do. You never tell a joke. Because who can translate? Get a punchline. It doesn't happen. So nobody ever tells a joke, and nobody ever talks about religion. It's the most divisive conversation you could ever have in those rooms. Here he was holding up a copy of Laudato Si. I said, oh my goodness. And he said, this is a very important document for everybody in this room, this time. I'm giving it to my staff. I recommend everybody copy. I have my staff assigned to me. I looked over to the Holy See ambassadors. I want to say thank you to your Holy Father. Please thank him for what he's done for us. Put it down. And he said, and I am not a Catholic. Well, that was a great moment. But this is an endorsement you're not going to get every day. And it went through the room, and the Holy See took advantage of it and brought a lot of copies around later on. So he knew the calendar. That July, finished up the document. And in September, Francis showed up, General Assembly, talk about all of this, made his visit to the US of A, timed it just right, opening the General Assembly, got up, finished his talk, went to Philadelphia. When he left, the General Assembly passed the resolution endorsing sustainable development goals that day. They were clearly linking up with his energy. So I give him high marks for that. 2-3 months later, we're in Paris. The COP21. Got a pretty good outcome. That was the 1.5 degrees. And Charlie come out, saw me in January, walking through the hall. He stopped, he came back to me. I want you to know, he said, your Holy Father was very instrumental in what happened in Paris. And so the faith groups were very helpful in what happened in Paris. I'm trying to run that very strong. Now, I don't have that much interaction with ambassadors ever, but there was a moment when somebody who was in the room saw it all happening and noticed me. I'm a little Christian, but he wasn't religious. Said to me, "Thank you on behalf of all the religious." So I know that this can make a difference. You can have some impact. You don't see it, but it's going on. Now we have this week, that day, and in a couple of weeks more, we have COP28. So he still knows what the calendar is. Let's make sure that they see this. And he talks about it in Laudate. Antonio Francis will say something too about it. So it's in the mix. And he talks about very forcefully, this is Francis again, this is on Thursday, attempts to deny or conceal or gloss over or relativize. He's telling us it's happening. You can't ignore it. And he's saying we have to get after it. That's in paragraph 5, right at the top of this document. He's letting us know. He sees what's happening. And we'll skip that one because it's too much text, but he's basically telling everybody, I know we get a lot of conversation, he says in that. About, well, no, we have to keep doing all this because it's job, beat the job, beat the job. He basically says the climate change is killing the jobs. Basically, wake up, shaking everybody. Wake up. It's time for us to step up and really address this. And he's aiming it directly at Dubai. Now, good luck. As we say, the game is rigged somewhat, but at least we have that moment and that conversation. And I'm taking great encouragement from the fact that Francesco and everybody has come together today. I'm taking great encouragement from the young women. Now I put the pictures of the young women up there because it's not that we're saying, oh good, they're here, we can relax. No. We're not off the hook. It's encouraging that the young women are stepping up, speaking, challenging, is for us, put our feet up, and not a license for us to walk away. I think we know that. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here on a Saturday morning, no matter how good the buns are. You're here because of that. You're probably here because maybe you have grandkids. I don't have that. I have nieces, I have 7 nieces, and every once in a while, my niece will come up to me, she'll have a baby. It's an Irish family. It's always a baby. And so, Uncle Kevin, can I ask you a question? Are we gonna be okay? It's not like today. Are we gonna be okay? I used to say, yeah, no problem. Now I say, it depends. That's what it is, it depends. So that's what I'm saying to everybody, it depends on us. Thank you.
Would you share?
Yeah, sure, I'll let Francesco have them. Thank you. Okay.
Friends, how are you doing?
Yeah. Kathleen, I just put fresh coffee there, hot water, people would like to just but could we just take a moment so we can welcome each other and introduce ourselves and all that? Here where we're from and what communities we represent. And so out on the table, we invited, if you represent any group at all, we'd love. Assistant committee's got some stuff out there, and I don't know if Catholic Climate Covenant, do you?
We don't.
You didn't bring anything, did you? Yeah, that's okay.
We can
But-
write your
Yeah.
organization's name and the website. Put it
Yeah.
on the table.
Yeah, so we want to hear from all of us, so just share your name, and maybe if, why you're here, you know, what your interest, and if you're part of any organization at all, and if. Here is. And we're sorry that you're not seeing the screen as well as. Kind of a setup. We also saw. Sound early on, it went out, but it came back, so we hope you're still with us. Okay. So maybe we could start right there at your table there and just begin. Archer?
Your kind of. It just happened that we have an event coming up. And I invite any of you who were particularly interested in El Salvador and Guatemala to see me, and I'll give you information about the event.
Virginia, it's a small futuristic convention for community. I put some flyers out there for my husband, who has been working on the guaranteed job income thing, and he's always trying to pull me into it, and I finally said I'll bring flyers. And that's, but it's really worthwhile if you take a look at it and make a phone call to your congressman. It would be helpful, I'm sure. People need jobs, even though the economy looks good. There's still a lot of problems there, and if you have a job, but if you're making $5 an hour, it doesn't really do you much good. So I'm so happy to be here, and I thank you so much for all your doing this.
I'm Jim Hines, member 2 of the Catholic Intentional Eucharist community in called Nova in Northern Virginia, and I'm a member of Co-Partners.
I'm Kathleen Guinan, and I'm a fan of hers, big fan. I'm a part of a global organization called Educateurs Sans Frontières, like Medicine Sans Frontières, which is Montessori education. Our headquarters is in Amsterdam. And we do Montessori education in displaced camps, variety of different places all over the world. Our headquarters is in Amsterdam, although we do have in Washington, DC, a community development organization right outside of Washington, DC in Kensington called Crossway Montessori Communities, which has 40, maybe 50 units of housing, a conference center. So all of you are certainly welcome to participate in. And we have a forest school, a Montessori forest school, where we have 75 children and families that participate in that, organic gardens, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot sparked by the mandate of Laudato Si to really begin with the youngest children creating environmental stewards.
I'm Tim Shriver, part of the Holy Trinity. Frequents this place for a whole host of wonderful reasons. I'm very grateful, for instance, to you and your brothers for always hosting us. My background is as an educator. I've worked in the field of social and emotional learning, developed programs that teach children self-awareness and relationship skills. I spent 25 or so years in the Special Olympics movement, which is a movement, I like to call it a movement to awaken people to universal human dignity. And more recently, I've been trying to figure out how to apply that lesson or those lessons to the toxic polarization in our country. Started a very small initiative called Unite, which is trying to develop ways of awakening people to their own uses of contempt and hatred of others.
Tim began this program, I think, 3 years ago. He was our very first presenter. And hopefully will return in the spring.
My name is Erica. I was in our church, but the first at Holy Trinity, and the first RCA course we had, or the first lesson, I guess, was about the document that I see, and so that letter was the first. That was the first. Yeah, I'm very lucky. So thank you so much. Yeah. I'm KT Haroon. I'm all Holy Trinity. They're so important in terms of opening up to the wider world of Catholic social thought. I have a particular interest in liturgy, and how does liturgy connect with what we're talking about today, and how can it help, because it is the way most of us Catholics encounter the church in the weekly and periodic liturgies. So how can we help all of us come together?
Thank you, KT. This start with this table here.
I'm Lynn Farr, President of Francis and the Redemptress, and I just have just wanted to expand my knowledge about what's going on in the climate, and just be worried about my adult daughters, and if they ever have children, and the children in the years to come, what's going to happen. So it's thankful to be here just to raise my awareness and knowledge.
And I met Kathleen 4 years ago at Georgetown University in a program featuring Thomas Berry's work, and was very moved by her embodiment of his wisdom, and felt the power of the great work. And then met Francis in a program of Kathleen's online, and we collaborated for this event to occur last year, and here it is 1 year later. So it's so wonderful that this is manifesting. I'm a member of the Holy Trinity Green Team. And in my professional life, I'm a movement therapist. We have what we call somatic practices, and there's a specialization within our movement practices that for 20 years we called ecosomatics, that people actually understand in their bodies that we are part of creation, we are the incarnation, and that we therefore have responsibilities to take care of ourselves, to take care of our fellows, and to make this real, to make this belonging real.
Annie Heisel, and I'm also a Holy Trinity and a member of the Green Team, and I'm a professionally bereavement counselor, and many people I see suffer from depression. And what purpose do I have that I've lost my child or I've lost my spouse? And what a purpose to be interested in climate, not climate crisis. I also, it was very taken, Catherine King. Also very taken, Catherine King.
she said, we're not politicians here, most of us. Though we write to our legislatures, but one thing we can do is when we're in the grocery store, wherever we are, bring up crime crisis, and I do that to my husband, to my friends. And it's amazing how many people are eager to know more. And that's fake news, so it's very exciting. Very exciting. I'm very moved. Kevin could share. Thank
Yeah, Laura,
My name is Laura Dabney and my brother is.
speak up, please, so people can hear.
My name is Laura Dabney and my brother is he worked with Francis and with Jim when they had admissions. He's moved on to Boston, so he's no longer here, but I've come to a number of these conferences and they've all been excellent. I belong to the UU, even though I went to Stone Ridge and Catholic. But I am an acupuncturist, and that led me to be more aware of health consequences. And at the UU, I'm working on how people can help out to reduce emissions by reducing their intake meat, but also there are other things. So this is all a big deal to me. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for the work.
Nelson area, and I got to know the conferences here through Francis, who I've known for quite a few years. And this particular one really interests me because I'm involved in the environmental group and the housing group at Washington Interfaith Network. So it's wonderful to be here.
Renee, work in the green team. I guess I would say I'm kind of a in a retirement as advocacy for homeless people in DC. Retired from the U.S. Public Health Service, where I manage very large health programs for underserved people. Thank you very much. I'd love to hear different takes on all the information that many of us have heard, but your presentation was very good and very focused. So I'm glad I'm here.
Father John O'Leonard. Just had to walk down the stairs to be here. But I've had an interest in climate change for a while. Study, as it were, reading books and articles. I just finished just about obviously global warming. So it's good to be here, and I appreciate the input.
How professionally, I'm worked for a very long time on the relationship of Congress with the defense budget, but this and anecdote is not singular of data, I know, but when you're deciding who you have to take on, we have little emphasis. My family has been selling cars in Northern Ohio since 1910. My father was the dealer. My late cousin was the dealer. His twin sons are now the fourth generation of Tello to be at the Cadillac dealers in Akron, Ohio. We were back home for a family event a couple of years ago. We went down to the dealership to talk to the boys, and the very large service department was half ripped open. It's a big dealership. What's going on? So we're getting ready to service electric vehicles. If now if it's the case that electric vehicles just mask the problem, and I don't know, but if doing away with tailpipe emissions is part of the problem, you may be up against fewer adversaries than you think. There are parts of the industry, economic interests, and dealerships in hundreds of communities around the country. They're big employers, and those jobs aren't going to go away. They're just learning how to do it different. So we might have the less of a problem than you might think at first glance. But thanks, Francis, and to the community for this wonderful important work you do.
entire life for the International Monetary Fund. And now I work in the Green Spring community with these two gentlemen as well. And I really appreciated Kevin's presentation. It was very informative, and I have interest in knowing and learning how I can make an impact on this climate crisis.
My name, I also live in Green Spring Retirement Community in Springfield. I'm retired from a career in international development, USAID, World Bank, and then a nonprofit network of Christian organizations working in health, and have decided in my retirement to focus my volunteer energy on this issue, which my generation helped to create. And I feel some responsibility for myself and my peers, and Troy, age 8, and Phoenix, age 5, my 2 grandchildren, to still spend some effort in my old age in trying to undo some of the damage that I and the economy that I was a part of created. So I'm working particularly with several faith-based organizations involved in the climate issue, trying to strengthen the faith voice in the overall effort to waken up our society to action and advocacy.
Hi, Dan Nussla with the Climate Covenant. We've been around since 2006, working on the U.S. Catholic Church to try to help the church writ large understand and act on the issue of climate change. We have 20 national Catholic partners. U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops helped to found us. So been doing that since 2006. So glad to be here.
And in case you didn't know, this year's recipients of the Catholic Climate Covenant Award were Kathleen and Kevin. So.
Scott Sanger, Peter's Church on Capitol Hill, member of their Care for Creation team. I'm also active in a river conservation organization called the Potomac Conservancy, where I'm a volunteer team leader for river cleanups. I heard Father Francis speak just the other night at a Zoom meeting of the Archdiocese's Care for Creation. So I'm very thankful to you for inviting me. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott.
My name is Rick Ryback. I'm the Director of Just Economics, and I help harmonize economic incentives, public policy objectives, job creation, affordable housing, transportation efficiency, and sustainable development. We look at things like parking policy, low user fees, the Rural Electrification Act of the 1920s, you're familiar with that, and property tax reform as ways to incentivize more equitable and sustainable development.
And I'm married to Rick. I've been friends with Father Francis for several years and have always heard about all the work that he's been doing here. And I just thought it would be great to see what all the nonprofits and Catholic groups are doing. So I've learned a lot today. Thank you.
I'm Ian Mitchell. I work with the Archdiocese of the Office of Concerns, and I also Care for Creation Committee and our Green Team leaders, a number of whom who are here, and contributed to the Archdiocese's Laudato Si Action Plan, which is out on the table. Please feel free to take one. We still have a lot of work to do. Personally, a passion for me is the collaboration, possibilities of collaboration between our work for Care for Creation and the work of broad-based community organizing. Ellen mentioned the Washington Interfaith Network. So we know that low-income people, marginalized people are often the most directly affected by the climate crisis. So hopefully we'll build that collaboration. Please keep in touch. I have cards outside and a sign up. Thank you.
I'm Bob Graff. I'm a former Redemptorist. I was in seminary with Father Francis, so we've known each other for a long time. I'm retired. I'm living in Green Spring. I'm actually right now the chairperson of all volunteer positions of Global Ministries University that has been sponsoring these Fratelli Tutti conferences, trying to bring Christians and Islam together. I'm part of Good Shepherd Companions, which has connections in Kenya and in India. Federation of Christian Ministries, the Jubilee House Church that Father Francis participates in when he's available, and the Redemptorist Partners in Mission. The thing that has been on my heart for the last 7 or 8 years has been the Sustainable Development Goals. I've been reading the annual report from the UN. And I'm a little bit shocked last year, and I just want to raise this to your attention, that almost all the nations of all the 193 that originally signed that document, almost all of them have done a voluntary national review. And only 5 have not, and the United States is one of those.
Thank you, everyone. It's such a joy to have you all here. I wanted to mention here that Bob is also the facilitator of another intentional community called Jubilee Church. So we have several intentional communities represented here besides our regular parishes, and those beyond the Catholic world and the Christian world, encompassing all our different faith traditions. So it's such a joy to have you. Kathleen, you're going to continue a little bit, or should we take a little break?
I'm thinking that we need a break.
Yeah.
I'm wondering also, if you would invite us to an embodied waking up for the next. I'm taking us somewhere else. We have been talking today about the crisis, describing it in a sense out there. But as we prayed this morning in our psalm, we want to enter into we want to speak not as a democracy, but as a biocracy. And we're talking about essentially, from Father Thomas Berry's perspective, the reinvention of the human. We will not transform our crisis. We will not survive this crisis unless the human that we are in our beautiful Christian tradition of pouring ourselves out, emptying ourselves, the Buddhist tradition of extinguishing ourselves. This modality of the human is no longer viable. And so we want to speak now about what is happening in this room, which is that we are witnessing and encountering embryonic form of the new humanity. And if we can come into that consciousness, I think perhaps we'll be less depressed, despondent, and we'll have a much, much more holistic and unified capacity within ourselves to enter into this really, really critical moment of planetary history. That's what I want to tell you. So maybe you need, if you have something stronger than coffee.
I'm afraid only coffee and tea. Take another 10-minute break and stretch, and there's a few more muffins in there.
People in the that we're starting. Thank you. little bit. If you're chilly while we wait to start, please feel free to rub your hands. Create a little heat. Well, I think that's intentional. I have some fresh air. But it is, I'm a little cold. Are you also?
I'm okay.
I think they don't want to spoil.
Yes, this is a way of creating some heat. This is the way I start my Qigong practice, which is a way that you can actually give yourself some energy. But I'm not starting the group until I see 2 more people. I mean, we're just gonna take 2 minutes. Yes. Yeah. So I've just washed my hands. And as you finish that, or if you haven't even started, we're gonna let our hands part and let our hands come down towards our sides. We all have 2 feet for human beings, one of our obviously shared heritages, and if we can just rock between our heels and the balls of the feet, feel perhaps where we might be holding our breath as we do that, or perhaps our breath might be invited to change a little bit, because back on my heels is a little different than forward on the balls of my feet. Feel in your body what your breath is doing or isn't doing. Might be taking a hill break. Yes, or might be like the first moment I did this a few minutes ago, I took a breath inhaling when I went forward. What's your body doing with your breath? Yes, a few more of those. Feeling your feet and your breath. We're all doing this together in our own timing. And then when you arrive back, what's the middle ground? Where are the arches of your feet between the front and the back? Let's just bend our knees and take a little bounce just over the arches. The bounce comes from the knees. Does your breath change? I'm nervous, so my breath is pretty. Does your breath change at all? You don't have to hold it. You can breathe in through your nose and out through your nose. We're opening ourselves to the energy of listening and receiving the wisdom from our retreat leaders, our program leaders today. Can you open your body to being receptive to perhaps something really hard to hear? What do we do when we're alarmed and fearful? And can we let a little of that go? Because if we're aware of it, we could let it go. And then if we just rise right up out of it, what if we really put our attention up into our shoulders, like we were just gonna be sucked right up and out? And what if we live like that, very high tone in our shoulders? Take an inhale there, and we wouldn't wanna live here, would we? On an exhale, release the shoulders, but keep the spine long, like you're reaching and feeling the heavens above you, and there is sky. And below our feet, there is earth. This is what we're part of vertically. And as we open our eyes, we finish with what we're part of horizontally, which is each other. So as we turn and we acknowledge each other, this is the horizontal plane. We can think about the roundness of the horizontal plane, our planet, and that we are all on it and we are in it. We are of it. We are with each other. Find a rotation in your body. See out the corners of your eyes each other. This is our morning community. This is our morning. Feel it in your body. Invite your body to open to each other. And then we finish with opening to Kathleen, who will take us on stage.
not yet comprehended the mystery of which we are, of which there is no inside or outside. And this is the, in a sense, state we also cultivate. In order to have the teacher, so to speak, the commune of creation in its violation and vulnerability, be our teacher going forward in this unparalleled and almost inexplicable moment of human history. Placed from heaven, for better or worse. I'm a theologian, and sometimes I wish I weren't, because it's not the skill set, shall I say, that I feel we need at the moment. If by theology we mean trying to comprehend this profound and essential relationship that we are to have with the great mystery of divinity, I feel more drawn, which is how I met that man, into learning about the human. Karl Rahner made us aware that, in a sense, the new theologies that have informed so much of what we might call the constructive movements of our church don't begin with theology, don't begin with God, how dare we, but begin with the human. And now, as Father Thomas wanted to say to us in the beginning, that's too small. And we've been talking about the human today. We've been talking about our human perspectives, our human activities, the obstacles which the human has put into play for this extraordinary, miraculous biosphere that we live in. But we now have arrived at a moment when the human, as the only surviving lineage of this hominin experiment, sapiens, right? Homo sapiens sapiens. We're it out of how many experiments we've done with this. This particular modality of human science needs once again evolutionary restart. And that's essentially what my teacher, your teacher, Father Thomas Berry, I think some of you in this room knew Thomas. I had the privilege of studying with him for years and years. He was my mentor for the university. His vision, I feel, is unparalleled. I don't know a voice, I have not encountered a voice that has spoken of the reality in which we find ourselves with such clarity, such availability as a master teacher. He says what we know, that ours is not an environmental problem. It's not an economic problem. It's not a political problem. It is a radically human spiritual problem. It has to do with somehow the arrestment of the human in its own evolutionary development. And Father Thomas, for me anyway, has helped me understand that. The crisis we face in these multiple derailments and disruptions of our living earth is not simply, as we've just said, any of those particular problems. It's profoundly a human spiritual suffering, more severe and more life-threatening, especially Father Thomas says this, than anything that could come toward us on this planet. More life-threatening than any pandemic, because it is a pandemic. It is a pervasive sense of alienation. Many of you are working in that place of healing these breakages and ruptures that cause our alienation just from one another. This is what Thomas is going to really challenge us to move beyond the anthropocentric sensibility that we have, as is Father Francesco Bergoglio. He's probably having the day cappuccino now. But anyway, we suffer because we are so, in a sense, spiritually unsatisfied or mature. We suffer a viral materialism because there comes with this sense of emptiness and a sense of excess, or a practice of excessive procurement, a blinding narcissism. And when the human is suffering, everything is suffering, because at this stage, 2023, we have constructed a planet and a world that is utterly human-focused, human-centered for the human. And everything else is somehow at the service of, as I think, as Ellen was saying, of our anxiety, our existential anxiety. It is the nature of all living beings to be anxious, because we are impermanent, and because our nature requires that we take in order to survive. Part of what our earlier relations understood was that there is a sacred relationship and rapport going on in this receiving, in this taking of what is necessary, and somehow allowing it to become a communion experience and not consumption experience, which it has become, unfortunately. So Father Thomas really is the one who has given us this perspective, or this perspective of, and the terminology of the work. Now that's ancient language, because in the spiritual traditions, all of the spiritual masters, in one way or another, call the transformational death and rebirthing work that the human must undergo to become human, the great work. Everybody, all the masters called it that. So Thomas brings it into our moment and speaks of the great work of our moment, essentially as the challenge to reinvent the human. That's his language. We may not like that language. It may not be organic or I don't know, woomy enough, but that's the way he speaks. And what we need to, in our faith, I mean, faith in the earth, in this glorious communion of subjects, as Thomas wants to say, not a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. Faith in this earth, when she, he, we come to the table, nothing else happens. And it's we who have to come to the table. Did that do that by itself? Here's the thing. It says this. That the human had to here we get that energy. And that is profoundly psychic energy. It is, we in the faith communities, we say it's spiritual energy. And this is what he wants to entice us toward. So really what I'd like to just provoke a little bit, I just want him in the room. I want him speaking with us and to us. Because I made a vow never to let him die. But we need to consider the most radical and imaginative spirituality for the Anthropocene, which is what our age is. The age when the human holds within its keeping the power of the life and death of everything. It's an awful, awful place to have arrived. But we're so amazing. We really, really are amazing. Except, as all of the traditions will say, we either lost our way, we got self-preoccupied, the kinder traditions, just say that there is this endless, ancient ignorance, anger, and blindness, and that it is our task to awaken from these. They are organic and psychological. This binding that keeps us from really being the humans that we need to be. Did you do that again? So I would like to just ponder these questions with us. I just want to put them in your mind. Every single person in this room is a great worker, obviously. It's just an honor to encounter all of us, and to recognize each other as kindred spirits in the great work, as this embryonic new human nature that's laboring to emerge. But what we need to ask each other is, what is the source of my ecological vitality and hope? Because we're going to need a lot of it. And we need to activate it in the generations coming after us. I've lived my life at a university with those gorgeous people that are coming behind us. Many of you are mothers and grandmothers and fathers, and we all need to be skillful, like shamans, about how to activate hope and vitality in ourselves and one another. The question that comes up today, but you've already named it, everybody who spoke, about what is my great work in this moment of peril and promise. Doesn't matter where you start off from, doesn't matter how you name it, but we all heard it here. Every voice spoke of the way we are laboring to heal something of the woundedness of the human for the sake of our family, the whole, not just the human. Part of the new human nature understands that there's no such thing as a singular species. All species are related to and dependent upon each other. It's a family. So what are the features and practices of my own ecological or ecozoic spirituality? That's something we might talk about today. How are we dreaming and scheming toward what Father Thomas calls the ecozoic? This is the age of life and the age of the household of the living. That's what ecozoic means. We are all, well, not all of us. Where's that young woman? She
had to go, yeah.
Sure. She is the only young one I was going to. And we need to name that as such. We need to stand in the dignity of our elderhood and not think we're just old. Anyway, we're elders, we're leaders in faith communities, in communities of social awareness and transformation. How do we consecrate our energies to the great work of Laudato Si? And now, Laudate Deum is, as somebody called it, a gut punch to all of us, and particularly Americans. And so we speak to each other here in the seat of the Wonder World Empire, as Thomas Berry would call it. What's mine to offer now? Well, I don't think these questions pertain to us really, because I think everybody knows. How many of us know Thomas? So let's meet him for about 2 minutes. We got some Irish music.
In the last 65 million years.
Kathleen, turn it up if you can.
Audio volume.
We don't think action.
We don't understand the earth as a sacred reality. The trees are sacred, the rivers, mountains. The universe, in particular planet Earth, is a communion of subjects, not a collection of objects. If we don't learn that, nothing's gonna work.
Thomas Berry is a multitude of things, something like looking at a mosaic or looking at a rose window with many petals and many colors coming through it. So he's a monk and a priest of the Catholic tradition. He's an intellectual, an academic, a professor. He's also a writer and a geologian who's put together a comprehensive story of our journey in the universe.
One of the great contributions that Thomas made to my life, he named what was the essential discovery. That was that the universe is fundamentally a story. When he said that, all that I learned in geology, astronomy, biology, came together in a single pattern, a story. Last night, the moon was shining on this wonderful day. I asked the moon, what should I say to you? The moon said, tell them the story. I asked the birds, what should I say? I said, tell them the story. I asked the clover, out on the lawn, what should I say? The clover said, tell them the story. My story, the mountain story, the river story, your story. The Indian story, the great story.
So this is the work that is entrusted to us to receive that great story, the new story that has never really been told in its fullness, in its majesty, in its mystery, with the first generations who are able to comprehend what everything, almost, what everything is, where everything came from, how we came to be, in the glorious organic communion of everything else. As the universe emerged, and then eventually as part of the song of the universe, this planet came to be with its diversity, such that there's more diversity on this earth than there is throughout the entire universe. Some scientists and observers of these things want to tell us. But for Thomas, I wanted to put Thomas's exhortations in how shall we say, in harmony, echoing the exhortation of Pope Francis, his recent exhortation, Laudate Deum. Thomas would say, wait, let's try Laudate Terram first. Let's celebrate and try to comprehend this unitive, glorious, spiritual reality emerging through the embodiment of nature that is divinity speaking to us. Before we start praising God, let us hear the earth praise its own source, divine source. So Thomas, as I say here, he's a challenging master. We need a challenging, sober, we need a tough modality of spirituality for this moment. He takes issue with all of the ephemeral kind of new age, even creation spiritualities that don't go deep enough, don't have the resilience and the athleticism, the virility, if I may say that, that is necessary for this moment. We have to reflect on what's happening. It's urgent. especially because many of us, most of us in this room, still live in zones of the planet that are relatively whole. Relatively, nothing's whole anymore. Kevin showed us the slide, right? We've got particulate matter, we've got plastic matter in our own bodies. So this industrial mechanistic world that we have dreamed, and we did dream it, into existence and put everything in it, into it, as a wonder world, is having its effect on us. Again, you know, it goes beyond commerce, economics, politics, or pleasantries. The planet is not a vacation resort for those of us who can afford to experience its managed and manicured beauty. Because most of us don't go into the wild world. And most of us have so tamed the wildness of this planet that we've not really encountered its daemon, its genius. So he wants to say something's happening that's way beyond us, but somebody's got to be aware of it, and that's who we are. We are the folks that are aware of the crisis in its political, economic, even ecological dimensions, but we've got to understand it more deeply, or we'll just keep doing the same thing. We'll keep trying to have instrumental remedies for what cannot be remedied instrumentally or technologically. It can only be remedied in transformational, evolutionary processes and emergences. And as Thomas is going to say to us, we're talking on the scale of millions of years here, what we're starting. This transformation isn't going to happen by 2030, or whenever the UN says that we've got to pull it all back. No. So, because we're losing splendid and intimate modes of divine presence. Father Thomas, as you know, was a cultural historian, not a theologian, and he rarely spoke of God, but he spoke a lot about divinity and the divine mystery animating everything, and that we're losing ourselves. He reminds us that the natural world is the larger sacred community to which we all belong. And to be alienated from this community is to become destitute of everything that makes us human. To damage is to diminish our own existence. Kevin illustrated that for us completely. From a human point of view, we didn't look at this through the lens of the shark, or through the lens of the pollinators, or through the lens of any of our relations on whom our entire existence depends. But this is what Thomas wants us to do. This is the challenge. This is the great work, and it's an inside job. Great work. He says history is governed by those overarching movements, and he names them in his wonderful book, The Great Work, that give shape and meaning to our lives, for sure, and to the lives of other kind, by relating the human venture to the larger destinies of the universe. Someone was asking me, I think you folks are about to receive Ilia Delio somewhere in a talk, and she's a Teilhardian, as of course Thomas was a Teilhardian, began the Teilhard Association. You can pray with Teilhard every morning if you get that little book from Orvis out there. he awakened Thomas Berry to the extraordinary mystery of the universe, of which the human is a radically unique mode of consciousness. Now, I want to stop myself. We're not that unique. We're uniquely a human mode of consciousness. But my little friend with whom I live is a radically feline modality, saved universe awareness. And I will never know what she knows and how to save it and be present to the beauty of this planet. Most of the time, she does less damage to it than I do. So Thomas wants to say that every single era, every single historical moment has its time to perform the great work that is necessary for it. And there has never been a greater work, or shall we say a more urgent work, or more critical work than the one that's entrusted to us as our historical complement, which is literally to save the planet. Francis, I'm not looking at you. For the rest of this thing, I'm not looking at he's got the hook with his finger. This is Berry's manifesto. He wants to say we're not planning for a new America, although we need to, and we know that. We're not planning for a new human mode of being, although I think he contradicts himself there, because I think we are. We're planning for a planet. We are planning to, as the human servants of the life community, we are planning for the survival of this extraordinary manifestation of whatever life is. We're planning on a scale of tens of millions of years. We begin it, we will not see it through, but every single step and station of the way is essential to the progression of this process. He says we have to have a plan. He calls the plan a great work. Well, I want to just offer you a few ecozoic exhortations of Father Thomas, as the Pope did, has offered us some apostolic exhortations. The practice, the commitment for now is to commit ourselves to re-enchantment with the earth. This may sound really, Kathleen, we've got to pull back the CO2 by 2030. This may sound as if it would be extra or something you'd pay to go Kripalu for, you know, a couple of $100 or more to try to do, have this re-enchantment with the earth. But unless and until the human comes into a renewed state of communion with all of the members of the community who sustain and support us, this is the only condition, not the only, this is the condition for the rescue of the earth from the impending destruction that we are imposing on. We have to, he says, reinvent the human as a species within a community of life species. So in a sense, as we'll see it, if I don't look, this doesn't send you all away, we need to ask ourselves at every single moment, how am I doing this? How am I becoming? I'm going to skip this really special slide about this is from his Montessori speech, Kathleen. You know that he was a great Montessorian. He is convinced that there are certain modalities and certain schools within the human enterprise that are conducive of this reimagination, and some which are not. And we know that. And if we read Laudate Deum, we know that the Pope spends the majority of that document really excoriating. Who's the Prince of Lies? Well, anyway, that voice that speaks through our media, through those who refuse to relinquish an anthropocentric, self-serving appropriation of all of the gifts and blessings of this earth for themselves by way of commodification and by way of commercialization. That's basically what we've done. We've turned this planet of gifts into a planet of commodities for sale. And that's our dilemma. We have somehow, I don't say all of us, but we have somehow lost the sense of the earth. So, Francis, I do have to look up at you. What are you saying?
I think we need to end, Kathleen.
I'm sorry?
We need to end.
Yeah,
People,
I can't.
we have to, Kathleen.
We're only 1 minute over.
I know.
Friends, would you give me 5
People, some people really have to go.
I'll close my eyes or turn my back, and you can go. No, just this one.
Okay.
Because this is where Thomas gives us his hope. As someone standing in this profound consciousness of the nature of the universe to continue its passage and its process into greater and greater and greater vitality, mystery. We don't know what it's doing. We know we're implicated tremendously in the process. But he wants to say the great work is not optional. Although its dimensions are at the moment incalculable, which we have realized, it is not impossible. Although an arduous and overwhelming task, exceeding in its complexity anything that we've ever undertaken, it isn't impossible. Because Thomas reminds us that we have to know that it will not be accomplished in any of our lifetimes, and that's a relief. Because some of us actually think that we've got to see such dramatic change. We may never see that dramatic change. But just to remind us, we're not looking for outcomes. We stay the course. We stay with the planetary impulse to create and heal and restore. But Thomas says, if future generations are to have any kind of life on Earth, within the only community of life of which we are aware, this great work must begin with all of the intention that we can muster and the intensity we're able to generate. We took too many coffee breaks. And I feel like I'm cheating you, not of what I have to say, but of what Thomas has to say. If Francis would allow me, I want to go home and make a little video of what I didn't do and send it to you. It's too good to miss some of his wisdom that he has to offer us.
And we want to thank both Kathleen and Evan.
this whole area and the gift of their presence this day. I want to thank Mr. Bob Purdy, our communications director, for working with us and making sure, hopefully, that people online got to hear and see and all that. And we want to thank Bob because he's just brand new at our job here with us, and he gave us this day, so we're grateful to him. To all of you and the great work that you do. Kathleen's new book, few of them are still out there, you know, Praying the Hours with Chardin. We have her some of her CDs out there.
The CDs.
Yeah,
You know, they're up-
anybody still has a CD player. You know, one of Kathleen's most famous things is that because she's a composer and a lyricist, but also an extraordinary singer, and she put out over 15 CDs. It's not profoundly spiritual. So feel free to take one of those CDs and any other material. And for Catholic Climate Covenant, make sure you sign up to get on their email. And anybody wants to join the Care Creation Committee of Washington or make some more connections with all these groups here, we want that to happen too, and all your other groups that you shared with us. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.